So, what is Peter Macinka up to again? I don't think Soder and Dobrin will enjoy it. Peter Macinka was in Germany. He was there on May 8th, so he wouldn't have to be at the memorial at Witkopf, where he would have met the president, so he was in Germany instead. And he was also in Germany to somehow deal with the issue concerning the Sudeten Germans and the Sudeten German Landsmannschaft Congress. All right? To start with, I would say that the Sudeten German Landsmannschaft is not a successor of any Konrad Henlein, nor of the Sudeten Germans, nor of the Nazi party that existed here. It's simply an association meant to bring together Sudeten Germans, displaced people and their families, and it is supposed to function as a certain cultural and historical organization. Originally, its goal was also to challenge the Benish decrees and to obtain some form of compensation or some form of property restitution after the fall of communism. But in the end, that didn't happen. They changed their statutes, and even though the founding charter still talks about, for example, the return of property and that they are seeking justice and these kinds of things, the current actual statutes simply do not pursue anything like that. Similarly, Bert Posselt, who is the current chairman of the Sudeten Germans and the Landsmannschaft, does not promote this either, and the current event that is supposed to take place in Brno is meant to be an event focused purely on reconciliation. What is important to say is that the biggest Nazis and radicals, who were indeed part of this group in the past, were actually swept out and expelled by Posselt, and the whole group was de-radicalized. It's kind of moderate now. The point is, it's moderate. Not only because most of the radicals were swept out, but also because most of the real witnesses of the expulsion, whose children were killed by Czechs or whose parents were murdered, are no longer alive. So there's really no one left to be truly angry at us anymore. Similarly, at this moment, that group of Sudeten Germans is basically one of the groups most reconciled with the past. And if Czechs could look at their own history the way Germans do and properly evaluate the things they've done and haven't done and show some self-reflection, that would be great. But unfortunately, Czechs have been brainwashed for years by communist propaganda, telling them that the Germans and Sudeten Germans will come here and take everything from us again. And as a result, people can totally lose their shit over it. Especially older people who are still affected by that brainwashing. Plus those who inform others. It's really a hateful contagion that doesn't help anything and only dishonors the victims of the entire Second World War by continuing to fuel something that should have ended when Nazism ended. However, a few years ago, André Babiš arranged in Germany for these big gatherings to be held here in some form. It could also be held because the Sudeten Germans changed their bylaws and so on. And based on that agreement, it was scheduled. But then SPD found out. SPD found out about it. SPD discovered it was going to take place. And so they seized on it. And instead of our minister Macinka, who has Philip Turek in his group, he's his protege, who has in his group a guy who really likes to polish the roof of his sports car with an outstretched right hand, even when the car isn't there. So instead of behaving in a rational and smart way, he tried to be an even bigger jerk than Okamura. And he went even harder after what André Babiš had arranged, and he went against the reconciliation that was supposed to happen here. Of course, by doing that, SPD and the motorists stirred up even more hatred in our society. In other words, that hatred doesn't necessarily come only from society itself, but it is fueled and kept alive by those parties that live off and profit from hatred. So SPD, and it seems that even the motorists, are simply heading toward this hatred, since they are unable to push through anything from their program. They look absolutely ridiculous. And so they have to stir up hatred and conflicts where there doesn't need to be any at all. Because they need to piss people off and turn them against each other so they can then rule over them. The worst part is that these leeches, and yes, I'm using dehumanizing language, these leeches thrive even more on human misery and hatred. instead of actually solving the problems of the people in the areas affected by these issues. SPD and motorists, all these parties, even the government ones, yes. All these parties keep getting votes in the border regions, yet they completely, totally don't care about the border regions. They totally don't care about us here in the Sudeten region. They haven't done anything for us. They haven't lifted a finger, even though they keep making promises to us and keep getting our votes. They don't give a damn about us. And yes, Fiala didn't give a damn about us. The ODS guys didn't give a damn about us either. But here's the difference. We didn't vote for Fiala. Why would Fiala care about us when those of us in the Sudeten region didn't vote for him? We voted for SPD, yes, even Macinka here, and they're screwing us over even more than Peter Fiala. Or maybe exactly the same, but the important thing is that they're supposed to represent us. They're supposed to solve our problems, really help these regions, and they just don't care. They only use us to get power, power that they crave. They're power-hungry bastards who crave control and manipulation. They promise us the world, and then they always screw us over. And then, just so we don't get the feeling that they don't give a damn about us and are laughing behind our backs, they start dealing with the Sudeten-German Landsmannschaft, just so we don't call them out for not keeping their promises to the Sudeten population. It's absolutely disgusting. First, they use us to get into power, then they screw us over, and then they turn us against each other and use us as puppets. Well, don't you feel like complete idiots? I sure feel like an idiot. And I didn't even vote for them. I feel like an idiot because this region is constantly being screwed over by a bunch of morons who just use it to siphon off money and get into power, and then they crumple it up and throw it away. Come on. Over and over again. And the worst are those who get these people in. Not the ones who don't care because nobody votes here. No. The worst are those who don't care even though everyone here votes. That is completely retarded. And Macinka is one of those assholes, but Reichel is even worse. Nevertheless, that's just regarding this topic in the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, they simply caused it this way. They did it this way. But I probably wouldn't blame Mr. Macinka for the way he acted in Germany. I saw it said in the Czech media that he damaged our relations with Germany by acting this way when he said that the Germans wouldn't enjoy it here. But if you read the whole interview and listen to the whole interview, you'll find that Minister Macinka was actually quite diplomatic. Of course, he could have said it in a bit more diplomatic and softer language than saying that the Germans wouldn't enjoy it. That could, taken out of context or misunderstood, maybe sound a bit like a threat or a provocation. But when you look at the whole interview, in the end, Petr Macinka more or less comes across as diplomatic because he is able to construct castles in the air that are untrue. But in the end, in the logic of that interview, he comes across well. So if this causes anything, it might just raise some eyebrows like, what did Mr. Macinka mean? What did that Czech minister mean? But it definitely won't cause any significant disruption in the relations between the Czech Republic and Germany. The Germans have already stated that they don't want to get involved in this situation any further, that they don't want to take any steps against the Czech Republic, even if the gathering is condemned. I would just say that we'll look like complete idiots. Most importantly, we'll look like complete idiots in Bavaria because, simply put, Andrej Babiš made the deal in Bavaria. And now the event that Andrej Babiš arranged in Bavaria, Andrej Babiš is going to condemn. So we'll look like a bunch of idiots, but I wouldn't say it will lead to any major complications. In Czech-German relations, we'll just look like clowns. And that's not really anything new. And otherwise, as for Macinka in Germany, he spoke quite well. As for Viktor Orban, they asked him about why he felt sorry for Viktor Orban. And he said that they had worked with Orban, that simply and plainly it wasn't personal, but it was political. Then he said that we stand firmly and unequivocally on the side of Ukraine, that nothing at all has changed about that. He handled this quite well. Then he had a classic Washington-style statement where he said that we must be grateful to Washington and America for bringing peace to Europe. Which sounds to me a bit like when the communists say that we must be grateful to Moscow for bringing peace to Europe. This constant need to be grateful to someone 81 years after it happened doesn't really sit well with me. I'm not really into that in this regard. I would say that maybe we could stop being grateful to anyone for what they did 80 years ago. And we should just do things right for ourselves, for Europe. And at that point, it could work a bit better here. Then they discussed the right of veto. To that, Macinka said that the right of veto is probably in foreign affairs. It won't be possible to abolish it because there has to be consensus. Here I agree that abolishing the right of veto in foreign affairs, if there is no consensus, is nonsense. Mainly, it's just not possible. And it probably wouldn't be a problem to abolish the right of veto if we in Europe felt that other countries take into account the interests of other states and that there would automatically be some kind of compensation for complications caused to other countries. In a federation, it would work in such a way that when the federation adopts a law or makes a decision that it knows will affect areas that used to be the Czech Republic, now it might be called the Czech state or the Czech region, or maybe still the Czech Republic, it's hard to say, but simply in the federation, when you pass a law that you know will harm part of your federation, then automatically, absolutely automatically, as part of passing that law, there is compensation for those areas or a remedy for the situation in that area. And the money for that comes from the area that will benefit from the law, so that part of the federation doesn't end up in trouble and so that they are simply compensated. Unfortunately, in the European Union, it still works in such a way that you have to fight for it, that the European Union tends to adopt something without taking into account what the Slovaks, Czechs, or even sometimes the Germans think, although rarely the Germans, but it can happen. And then the Germans or Czechs or Poles, it doesn't matter which country is affected, have to fight for compensation or an exemption or something like that. And unless they actively push for it, they won't get it. If we want to abolish the right of veto, then we simply have to start functioning in a way that takes into account the interests of all parts of Europe and automatically adopt corrective measures when making decisions if some parts of Europe might be harmed. That's how it is. The Czech region, yes, if the so-called patriots heard that. Look, I was just explaining how it would work in a federation where there would be no veto at all. And that means if we want to abolish the veto, it has to work exactly as I said, that there is an automatic response and remedy for any damage caused by a decision that would otherwise have been vetoed, which is not happening. Right now, it just works in a way that instead of automatically washing the dishes when you see they're dirty, your mom has to tell you 10 times to go wash them before you actually do it. And right now, that's exactly how it works in Europe. It should work so that you go wash the dishes automatically because you see they're there, because you know they're there, and because you actively care about whether there might be something in the sink. That's not happening now, but it should. But otherwise, overall, I would say that Macinka handled the interview well. In the context of that interview and in German media, he probably doesn't come across badly. Of course, Czech media dramatized it. In the Czech context, of course, Macinka is an asshole who's needlessly stirring up hatred against the Sudeten Germans. Instead of supporting reconciliation between nations and cooperation among people, he's stirring up conflicts and doing absolutely nothing to improve the situation, quite the opposite. But fortunately, maybe they don't know that in Germany, so he comes across well there. So in Germany, he did well, but in Czechia, he's just an idiot. I think we can agree on that. A good foreign minister handled it pretty well. A bad party chairman in the Czech parliament and in the Czech government. Definitely. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Check out the stream. See you next time. The stream continues. And yeah, let's move on to the next topic.